Bonjour, my Blasmophetes. It's Mansant back at you with my personal favorite deck in Flesh and Blood, and that is Blood Debt Claws Levia. Now, this deck is as thematic as it gets. You're slinging mountains of damage at your opponent, building up heavy blood debt so you can summon Blasmophet, and then hoping that all the blood debt you accrue doesn't come back and bite you in the end. That is so fun, it's so thematic, like I said, and is just a really exciting deck to bring to the table because you never quite know how the games are going to go. But if you play this deck well, it is really, really rewarding. It's just that right now the metagame is pretty wrong for it. So I wouldn't recommend this deck, even before we jump into it. I wouldn't recommend putting a ton of time into this for this metagame. It's for a couple reasons. Number one, Levia is not a good deck for an aggro meta, because she is a hero that has enough damage in her deck to win any game, even versus a pure control Oldhim. I promise you, those games are easy. But when you're versus an aggro deck, you are under pressure to draw your good cards in sequence early game to be able to race at all. And if you don't draw those cards, you just don't have a shot. And that's not fun. You don't want to show up and just scoop to every aggro rune blade you see. And you will win some games. They're going to be fewer and far in between, but you can just like double draw Bloodrush, and that's just insane. But I wouldn't rely on those kind of draws to pull you through a tournament. So right now, the other big problem is that the dominating deck that we see right now is Bravo Star of the Show. And this is a deck that is a very bad matchup for Blood Debt Levia because it has these hit effects that destroy your hand in Oaken Old, in Crippling Crush. And on top of that, the decks that are probably going to arise to counter that strategy also disrupt the hand. And Levia is prone to all kinds of hand disruption. So she's looking to be really, really risky to play in this upcoming ProQuest season. But that said, she's still tons of fun. I mean, I played her all through side events when I was at SCGPhili this weekend, and I went 5-1, and I had a fantastic time. And I did beat Viserai twice, almost beat Briar. I mean, it's a deck that can really do some amazing things. And the way I've got it built for Everfest is to basically make it so that at worst, you're coin flipping a matchup. You know, the damage is going to be there. Even when you're against something like Starvo, you could win. You just need to draw your cards. So that's how this deck is built. Like literally every single matchup in the game is winnable with this deck. Some things just have to go your way. So that's kind of what we've got going on here. As we look at the equipment in particular, you'll kind of get the gist of that. In that the core here is just very straightforward. We're not doing anything too fancy with getting very specific about tuning for like Prism matchups or Dash, where I used to take the Findel Spring Tunic. We're just trying to make this deck jack of all trades, master of none, which it absolutely is. So for the core, we've got the Carrion Husk. You take this in every matchup except versus Wizard. Wizard, you're going to take the Null Rune Robe. Carrion Husk is just an absolute menace of a card. It is going to cover up an entire 6 block of HP, as we all know, as we all love. I like to think of this card as just protection from a CNC. A CNC would normally eat 2 cards or arsenal. Well, now it's just eating an equipment piece, and the 2 cards your opponent pitched and then played for the CNC were wasted. I love this card. Absolute, just one of the best cards in a Blood Debt Levia list, and of course the Blood Debt you're probably not going to take because you're turning it off. So just core here. The weapons are Mandible Claws. That's because this is an aggressively oriented Bloodrush deck. Mandible Claws just push insane amounts of damage for this kind of playstyle. You're normally looking at minimum about 18, where you get to play Claw for 5 into like a Boneyard Marauder or some other attack for about 18 or more damage. So absolute best weapons. You're not going to run anything else. For the legs, you've got Scabskin Leathers. Only thing in that slot worth running, honestly, because this is the kind of deck where you do roll Scabskins more than I'd like to admit. Especially with this kind of build, I've got a lot of Ghostly Visits, as you're going to see. You are going to roll Scabskins anytime an extra action point could net you 4 damage. And that basically means a Ghostly Visit is sitting in your arsenal, or sitting in your Banish Zone, rather. And the reason you're going to do that is because you never actually have to play greedy in keeping cards to roll for Scabskins. You know, like a Rhinar, for example, never has that ability to play out of his Banish Zone. So if he's rolling Scabskins, it's because he kept cards, or rather was past cards, and is now free to roll Scabs to see if he can do something with those extra cards. Levia just always has cards that are playable in your Banish Zone, so you're going to be rolling a lot to try to get value out of them. Otherwise, what are you doing with this zone, right? So you do roll. It happens. You are going to roll 1 sometime. and that's why Gambler's Gloves is there. It's just protection from a 1. It's a safety net. Levia loves her safety nets because she's pretty glass cannon. In line with the Gambler's Gloves, we've got the Hope Merchant's Hood, which is one of my favorite cards to run in Blood Debt Levia because she needs these safety nets, these bailouts from when your hand is just trash. Like nothing, no way to turn off Blood Debt or all reds when you need to trade a bit. I mean, Hope Merchants just protects from so much, and it instantly fills the grave. So really like this card. I'm going to take it in basically every matchup that's not aggro because I want that safety net, right? But when you are versus aggro, you need the extra HP. You need that extra ability to cover up a hit effect so that you don't have to block with a card from hand. And that's where the Arcanite Skullcap is big. You're going to take this versus all the aggro Rune Blades. You're going to take this versus like Katsu and maybe like Axis Dorinthia even. So it does have to be in the list. I don't like running it, but like I said, I don't like playing against aggro anyway, but you just got to be prepared for it best you can. And then last thing, I think I already mentioned a bit, this deck list is just to take on the entire metagame. Just be a jack of all trades. And to cover that, you do need to have something ready for Wizard in case it's there. So we've got the Null Rune Robe, we've got the Skullhorn just for Arcane Barrier 3 for that matchup. You literally don't run these versus anything else, but it fits the theme. We're just going to try to sit down from our opponent and at worst coin flip the game. So let's jump into the core of it. So what we've got laid out in front of us here is both the most enjoyable, the most frustrating, and the least rewarding deck in Flesh and Blood. And I don't even say that facetiously. The whole Blood Debt mechanic is still a long ways off from being really worth playing into. The only payoffs really being Doomsday and Hexagore right now, but hopefully that'll change in the future. As of now, you play Levia mostly because she's really fun, and also because she's an aggro deck that has a very strong control matchup because of her recursion package, which we'll go into. And I like that flexibility when I play her. I think the skill expression is actually very high with this hero, in that there's very minute things you can do to control your own variants that when you play this hero a lot, and you get a lot of games in, start to push your win percentage past what this deck really should have. Because this deck has an extra lose condition in Blood Debt. It just does. It should be a deck that loses to itself a lot. But the more games you put into this hero, the less you lose to yourself. And that's a fantastic feeling. Because if you can just not lose to yourself, then Levia is a really good deck. Not a great deck. Not a deck that's right for the metagame. But she's still actually really good, and not a lot of people appreciate that. So what I've done with this build is given it kind of 3 paths to go down, whether it wants to be a full-on aggro deck, a kind of like mid-rangey deck that's going to see its entire card pool and just win through the amount of numbers that it has at its disposal, or a anti-control deck that's going to pull from an entire extra zone all these banish playable cards that are just really strong and outvalue decks that want to just run you out of threat. So we've got the core laid out, and I'm just going to go through, or not the core even, we've got the entire deck laid out, and we're just going to run through why the cards are in here, and then talk about those 3 different kind of sideboarding strategies and what you take out to make the deck do what it wants to do. So we're looking at a 71 card deck here, and every card in the list has a reason for being here, so we're just going to run through that real quick. Now this top left are the Blood Debt attackers, and this is what makes Levia so unique. And this is because she's got these attacks that are overstatted by like 1 or have an extra keyword for their stat line at the cost of having Blood Debt and the Banish 3 as a cost to play. So Boneyard Marauder, perfect example of this. If you compare this to Bingo, which is a 1 for 5, Boneyard Marauder is a 1 for 6, but it's got Blood Debt and it costs that additional 3 cards to banish from graveyard. So Levia is overstated, but it's not by a lot. So that means in a longer game, in these mid-rangey control games, you will see the value in these cards turn after turn because of these little incremental values that you're getting out of every single card. Like imagine on the inverse of this, how good it would be if every card in your deck blocked for 4, just that extra defense value. People would think that's nuts. You know, your entire deck's full of defense reaction. That sounds amazing. Well, Levia has that on the aggressive flip, where all of her attacks have that extra bump to their offense or their keywords. So Boneyard Marauder, 1 for 6, very, very strong. The main benefit of this card is that it's going to fit your cost curve of playing Bloodrush into Claw Claw, Boneyard, all off of just 2 blues. So Boneyard, very, very strong blood debt card because of that. It's also a 1 cost, so if you do brick into an all-red hand, Boneyard Marauder is still a play that you have that's pretty safe, that lets you block down with some other cards in hand and do something at least. So I love this card. It's one of the better cards in Blood Debt Levia. Now, you've got Graveling Growl. And Graveling Growl is one of the best statted cards for Blood Debt Levia because it's not an easy card to compare to anything else in the game. It has the condition of that it's only playable if you banish 6 or more this turn, but the stats on it are nuts. The red is 1 for 7, yellow is 1 for 6. This card is so, so, so good, and of course it combos beautifully with Dread Screamer. Dread Screamer being a 2 for 6 that banishes 3, and if it hits a 6 is going to gain Go Again. So the easy bread and butter combo is just a 3-card hand here in Dread Screamer and Graveling Growl plus a blue for 13 damage, which is fantastic. I mean, you're turning these 3-card hands into being like 4.3 worth of damage each. That is so, so, so good. But the other thing that Graveling Growl can do for this deck is unlock really cool synergy pieces with stuff like Art of War and Beast Within that we'll get into later on. I think a lot of you guys know this, but this is a come one, come all type of deck here, so we're just going to be patient about it. You're going to run the blue Dread Screamers as well, because Dread Screamer having Go Again is just so, so key for unlocking math that breaks these defensive decks down. And the blue Dread Screamer still comes in at a breakpoint for 4, and that's good enough. That's the fact that you pitch this into your deck, comes back around later, and it's still a good card is fantastic. Levia wants that quality pitched back into her deck. She doesn't get it out of a lot of her other blues. So then you got Hungering Slaughter Beast, which is overstated in the attack slot here, coming in for 7 for just a 2 cost. This card's not great, but you do run it just because it's a little bit more offense. It's also good into Prism that it can pop Herald of Triumph because it is higher than a 6 attack. So it's just in that slot because it's better than anything else that would really go there. The card pool for Levia is still pretty limited. You have to remember she's only pulling Shadow Brute cards out of the Monarch set so far because we didn't get any in Everfest. Thanks, LSS. Then one of my favorite cards in Levia as well is definitely Endless Maw. Endless Maw is a 3 cost for base 6, but then if it hits a 6, it's going to gain +3 for 9 attack. So effectively off of a 2-card hand, you're swinging 9. That is 4.5 damage per card there. That is fantastically above rate. And this card used to be the real allure to playing Levia. Like, imagine all the math looked as good as this card does. Man, Levia would be nuts. But actually, as we see more and more toys come out for other classes, there's a lot of other cards that are breaking this kind of math as well, especially for Runeblade. So this card is still great, but it's not pushing those crazy numbers that used to draw people to Levia. So that's the Blood Debt attackers, the core of these attacks that are going to clear out your graveyard, come in for their overstated nature or their extra keyword, and be core to your attacking strategy. But they all have the cost of banishing 3 from graves, so they're not immediately playable. So you need to supplement that a bit, and this deck is running quite a strong core of early game playable cards because I want to be the aggressive deck for the most part. I want to be proactively chucking things at my opponent so that I naturally transition into a mid-game where my Blood Debt cards have enough in graveyard to banish, where I don't have to just play super defensive early game, because that's actually kind of a losing strategy in this meta right now. You can't just block out with a bunch of 3 blocks and still come back. That actually is not how the game works right now. So you do need some proactivity in the early turns. So we've got Swing Big, which is a great example of that, coming in 2 for 8. Early game, this is a great trade. It's almost Endless Maw level, but it also has other synergies coming later in the games if you've banished previously with like Dread Screamers or Art of Wars or discarded a Beast Within, whatever, have this on a Bloodrush turn. It's just a lot of damage, and that's what Levia needs. You really don't care about the Quicken token thing in this deck because you're just looking for raw damage and you're trying to combo your attacks with multiple things going on a turn, not necessarily just returning a 2-card hand unless it's Endless Maw. And so Swing Big, especially later in the game, is going to have something else be part of its turn because you need to turn off Blood Debt. This doesn't do it. So Swing Big actually is just fantastic. Early game, it's just something to play, something with good damage, something that fills grave. And late game, it's a ton of damage that's going to combo with something else that turned off Blood Debt. So really great card for the deck, actually. And then we've got the Pulpings, the Shadow Blasphemfets, and the Wild Rides. And these are your non-block attackers. that are very, very strong to play early game, but then start to taper off. And we'll get into why the ratios look like this when we start doing some of the sideboarding stuff. But pulping is still just strictly better than Wild Ride in that it does demand 2 cards out of hand. Otherwise, it will get go again no matter what the draw discard was. Whereas Wild Ride will always get the go again if it drew and discarded a 6. So I'm liking the ratio of 3 pulping to 1 Wild Ride because pulping demands interactivity, which in an aggressive metagame is actually very strong for you. You might as well look at it like something similar to a CNC, where if an aggro deck chooses to interact with you, then they've slowed down, whereas pulping is now, if they don't interact with you, you're ramping up. So it's like the inverse of CNC in that way, and really, really like it for that. 1 Wild Ride is just because Go Again is so strong in Brute. The Shadow Blossom-Fets, they're very key in this metagame, as I've started to really appreciate. I don't think they were good at all in the Tales of Aria meta. In the Monarch meta, the format was way too fast. And right now the format is very fast, but there do exist decks that are trying to play a slower game. And Shadow Blossom-Fet is really, really strong against those decks like Oldhim, even against Prism, or you've got some OTK Viserai players where this is really going to come in clutch. Against Kano, it's clutch. Really because this piece proactively pulls out your recursion playables. And when it does that, you can start to just never miss Blood Debt, never miss an ability to play one of these oversided attacks because you're pulling out these pieces from your banish zone into graveyard, just kind of in a loop as early as turn 1, thanks to Shadow Blossom-Fet. So card has really found its place. It's definitely a sideboard card. It's a card that you're not running unless you really need what it's bringing to the deck. I don't think playing Levia like an innately toolbox deck is actually that good still. But yeah, it's there. So I'm kind of moving on from that. The recursion pieces that Levia does have, I'm running 3 Ghostly Visit, and this is really for when you're taking the deck in the aggressive route, which we will get to. Ghostly Visit is just free card advantage when comboed with Art of War. When you have it in hand, it just banish, go again, draw 2, and it's instantly playable. So it's very, very live in that sense. It's also, when you run it at 3, you're very likely to see it. And the faster you see this card, the more playable it is just sitting there in banish, and it's letting you roll scab skins and hopefully getting ahead in the damage trade when you get those extra action points or perhaps the go again from some of these cards. So really, really like Ghostly Visit. It's of course also part of that super strong 2-card hand where Dread Screamer plus a blue can come in for 6 and then go again 4 with Ghostly Visit for 10. That is still fantastic. You've got Double Howl from Beyond because all you need is 2 to set up kind of the like 2-cost attack double blue loop that you can do for a bit, where you play a attack like Hungering Slaughter Beast, clear your graveyard, then this goes to graveyard. It's the only card in graveyard. You can instantly get to 3 no matter what your opponent does by playing Howl Howl into another 2-cost attack, and then it will banish the howls, and you can kind of just loop it like that. Not infinitely, but just the ability to on-demand fill your graveyard to 3 by having Double Howl is super, super strong, and it's just always a way to dump extra resources into damage, but you're not going to run it in every matchup, as we'll get to. Deep-Rooted Evil is really, really strong in your slower games. It costs 3 for 6, which is not a good rate at all, but the ability to just dump in very good cards back into your deck to still swing 6, for a deck that's trying to beat you by playing slow and grinding you out of resources like an Oldhim would, this card is super, super strong because this is not costing you anything from deck to play, and it's still 6 damage. It's still damage they need to answer. So at 1, it's quite good for when you need it because it doesn't come up all the time. Then for your go again pieces, you've got Triple Shadow Puppetry, which is going to be for when you are committed to more of the play from banish strategy, like with Deep Rooted Evil. You've got the Art of Wars, which are absolute core to Levia. They are so good in banishing the Ghostlies for card advantage, banishing 6s to make the Graveling playables, combining with your Bloodrushes to just go wide, 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 and apply the Bloodrush buff to potentially like 3 attacks in that turn. I mean, it's great. Art of War, definitely a good card. And then you've got Bloodrush, and Bloodrush is really the all-star of the deck here. Mandible Claws are not inherently good, right? They need something to discard to pop off, and this is that card, and it really breaks how good those are. Because Levia can never be a weapon deck because none of the weapons innately turn off Blood Debt. So I am still of the mind that using the weapon slot to just be a very strong, aggressive piece with Bloodrush is the correct way to play it. So Mandible Claws with Bloodrush, a fantastic combo. Like I said, it's normally coming in for 18 damage because you get to go Claw, Claw, attack. It can go for even higher than that. I've had 34 damage Bloodrush turns, but those are few and far between. Card is just fantastic, and all you need to make it live as early as turn 2 is one card in graveyard. So one block, say you're or you like one attack like a swing big, just something in graveyard, then will make Bloodrush playable because this is going to go to grave, the card you discard is going to go to grave, and then you get to Claw, play something that banishes 3, and that's super, super strong. This card is live almost right from the get-go in Levia. Then you've got some of your discard packages that combo well with these, combo well with Bloodrush. Beast Within, fantastic card for Levia. When Beast Within is discarded, it's going to banish a card from your deck, and you're going to take a life until it finds a 6, and then that card is added to hand. And what's cool about that interaction is the card counts as banished first. So it's going to turn off Blood Debt and then go to hand when you discard Beast Within. And that is so, so strong because sometimes your Bloodrush can feel a little awkward. Say you have Graveling Growl in Arsenal, but then you draw a Bloodrush. That normally isn't great, but if you draw a Bloodrush Beast Within, and then you block to purposely discard Beast Within off Bloodrush, you're drawing 3 cards. Your Graveling Growl's live. I mean, it's fantastic. Fantastic. Great card here. The Mark the Beast is kind of a secondary option to Beast Within. It is great aggressively as well when you're playing very, very fast. The fact that you can just play this out for 6, I mean, sure, that's okay. It's going to turn off Blood Debt, but really what's good about that at all is that it doesn't require the banish 3 from grave. So you can kind of have these in-between turns where, you didn't trade that heavily. Your graveyard's not in a great spot, but you can still at least return with Mark the Beast. So it's playable. But the main reason I like it at all, especially in this version of the deck, is because when you discard it, it banishes itself. So that's going to turn off Blood Debt, and then it's also going to make stuff like the Graveling Growl live. So that's really what it is there for. It's just like a worse Beast Within, but the playability is fine. It's fine. Then we're going to skip these cards for a second. We've got kind of just the stock standard blues here. None of these are too special. You're going to play them if the games go super late, but for the most part, these are all just blocking or pitch fodder. Triple Unworldly Bellow, triple Convulsions. Those are just some buff cards that in the very late game scenarios can do something special for breakpoints, but like I said, you really don't want to play these out early. Double Reckless Swing. I really like Double Reckless Swing in Levia because you want to put pressure. You want to be constantly throwing numbers at your opponent, and the more they disrespect your damage, the more they take, is the more likely is making it more likely that you can just find Reckless Swing and end the game, because they're going to disrespect your damage and then try to finish you, and you just finish them in a half turn cycle ahead because of Reckless Swing. So I still really like Double. Double can clunk up in this build because you've got stuff like Doomsday and Eye of Ophidia that you don't want to draw all at the same time, but that's why I really like to run Hope Merchant's Hood if I can. Then you've got the other blues. These are the blue 6s in Wrecker Romp, Dead Rumbler's Soul Harvest. That's 7 blue 6s, which is 4 more than Rhinar gets, which is really, really strong. Thank goodness we have this, because the build would start falling apart because there's not many quality blues that you can pick from. Speaking of quality blues, though, Doomsday, fantastic card. You get to summon good old Blasmafet, and this guy is just mean in almost every scenario. He's not great versus like Katsu, can be questionable versus Prism, but in every other scenario, casting a Doomsday just is another safety net that you've now created for yourself, and that's what Levia is all about, to actually get wins. Then you've got Eye of Ophidia. Once again, I only play this card because I own it. This doesn't have to be in the deck list by any means. You could run pretty much anything else in this spot, any other blue you wanted, like 1 blue Barraging Beatdown, like even 1 energy potion, whatever you want to do here. Or Heart of Fyendal if you own Heart of Fyendal. I just find that a little bit more in the blue slot is powerful for the deck. You want a lot of pitch to fuel stuff like the Howl from Beyonds, or to fuel like an early game pulping, pitching a blue into whatever it draws discards, into pitching a blue to go claws. So I just want the little bit extra blue. So I do run Eye, and of course the opt effect is very strong with Pulping, Wild Ride, Shadow Blossom Fet, and the Beast Within, Blood Rush, Art of War. I mean, it has synergies. It does. So I'd run it if you have it, but don't go out of your way for this one. And then the last card of the deck, this is new from Everfest, just like Swing Big, but this one is maybe like the coolest play line ever. Like that the deck has ever had is because of Talisman and Recompense. This card feels so good in the deck. You don't play it in every one of your matchups, like we'll get to actually just in this next segment, but when it's out on the field, some of these mid-range matchups that could feel so good until they didn't, until you drew really bad, something goes wrong, you're stuck on non-blocks, like whatever it is, and the game just fell apart out of nowhere, even though mid-range should feel good for you. Talisman and Recompense actually solves that problem. When it's out on the field, all of a sudden a red hand drawn mid-game, or like a red hand with a Blood Rush, doesn't feel terrible. It actually is awesome. And on top of that, Talisman and Recompense has a really great interaction with Blood Debt stuff for whatever reason. I don't know why it works this way, but if you have 2 cards in your graveyard and have a Talisman and Recompense in play, and then you pitch a red to play one of these guys, the Talisman will trigger, go to graveyard, and then this is legally playable because now there will be 3 targets in the grave with the Talisman. I don't quite know why it works that way. I feel like it should check that there's 3 engraved beforehand, but that's how it was ruled. So Talisman, really, really great card. It is awesome. When I played this at SCGPhili, I kept it in every matchup just to test it out and see if I liked it. And in all 6 games, it was fantastic. The card did something incredible that was not available to the deck before. So really, really like it. It also has Go Again right on it. So it is just strictly better than playing Energy Potion in the list, which I used to do. Because even versus Bravo, if he pummel crippling crushes you and you lose like all but 1 card, that 1 card will at least pay for whatever's in Arsenal. Because even if it's something like an Endless Maw and you have a red left, Talisman is going to crack, let you pay the Endless Maw. So great card, heavily recommend. So with that, let me show you kind of the 3 different ways you can pull cards to build this out. So with a 71 card core, you're looking to pull 11 cards out of the deck to get it down to a clean 60, and you definitely want it at a clean 60. Levia is the kind of deck where you want consistency to be king, and it's not overly possible with the card pool she has, so you got to try your best. You want to make sure you're running as lean a deck as possible so that you see the cards you exactly need for your matchups. So there's pretty much 3 ways I like to side this build. In and out. So the first one here would be if you're full aggro, you need to just race your opponent. This would be if you're against something like Axe's Dory or Viserai, aggro Viserai, I guess. Even Chain, Briar, the new Bravo, something where you just need to go balls to the wall, Katsu as well. So when you're playing it this way, you really just want to have every card in your deck do something to help accelerate the game as fast as possible. So you're going to drop cards like Shadow Blossom Fet. The card's just too slow. It's not setting up anything that you're trying to do to actually win that kind of game. You're going to pull the Howl from Beyonds because they're a little bit too slow. You don't want to draw that card. You want to banish it with Shadow Blossom Fet, and of course you're taking that out. Taking out Deep-Rooted Evil because it's a really bad rate. You don't actually want to ever pay for that card in an aggro matchup. There should be better options for you. You're going to pull Shadow Puppetry because even though this gives your next attack Go Again, it's really best when you're heavy on that recursion package, which you're just not going to have because you don't have time to set it up. So you're going to pull those cards. Now we've pulled a total of 9. 2 more cards to pull out here would be the Talismans. And I really like these, but they're too slow when you're playing super hard aggro. Because yes, it's a safety net, but how many safety nets do you need if the game's going to end by like turn 6? So when you're versus hard aggro, this is the 60 I'd run. Helps you be really aggressive with the pulpings and the wild rides here and triple ghostly. You're just churning through, trying to find these and banish in particular, because finding ghostlies is what actually unlocks the damage trade in your favor in these kind of hard aggro matchups, because you get to start rolling scab skins, you get to start cheating damage with ghostlies, you get to start getting free card advantage with Art of Wars combined with the ghostly visits. I mean, this is kind of what it's all about. So for the early game, these are great. For the card advantage, these are great. And of course, the rest of the deck is just doing what it wants to do, being consistent, dealing damage. So next would be mid-range. So when you're playing against a mid-range matchup, something like normal Bravo, or Rhinar, or Lexi. I mean, geez, I actually feel like midrange is kind of dead right now. I'm having a hard time naming heroes. When you're in against that kind of matchup, you want your deck to be ready to see itself all the way through and win the game by probably the end of your first cycle. That's what you're trying to ideally do with a mid-range playstyle. You want there to be enough power in that first cycle of your deck. You're not trying too hard to set anything up. You're just being very overwhelming in the amount of damage you have in that first cycle. You want everything to be live. You don't want to be clunked up. So to do that with this build, you're going to cut the Pulpings. You're going to cut the Shadow of Blasmafets. You're going to cut one Ghostly Visit, one Deep-Rooted Evil, and the Shadow Puppetries. So we're trimming down these 11. And this is because the Shadow Puppetries in a mid-range game, not strong enough. You're not playing with that Deep-Rooted Evil and Banish. That's really what these are there to enable. You're not playing with the Deep-Rooted Evil because you're not taking in the Shadow of Blasmafet package to just pitch cards back into your deck for later, right? This is mid-range. We're trying to win in that first cycle. So that's out. You're dropping one Ghostly Visit because you want to see you want to see your deck the whole way through. You're not playing overly aggressive. You're blocking heavily. You're trading back heavily and letting the incremental advantage that these cards have do the work for you. So you don't need 3 Ghostlies because finding 3 Ghostlies isn't actually good. When you're running 3 against aggro is because you just want to find one as soon as possible. But in the mid-range match, you will see at least the 1, if not the 2, by the time you need it. So it's just that third one not needed. The Shadow of Blasmafets, like I said, you're not actually trying to do like pull out these proactive pieces because it is a trade game that's being played, and trading means you don't need the proactivity in starting your recursion pieces because you'll be blocking, and that will be okay to kick up your banish engine. And then you're dropping the pulpings because a lot of mid-range decks are going to be running defense reactions, so you just don't want to be really screwed over by a pulping that hits and you think you're safe, and then there's a defense reaction in Arsenal, and this card is just bad at that point. So you're going to cut them, and what that leaves you with is, like I said, that first run through of the deck that should have everything you need to win. You have the double howls, which you will find naturally, and drawing this card isn't great normally in aggro because you don't have a lot of time to do anything with like a 2 block that costs 2, but in mid-range, blocking for 2 is not the end of the world, and just having that in your graveyard, hitting it when it does hit, it's not necessarily a loop you're trying to set up, is just great value. It's going to turn, even a Boneyard Marauder and a blue into a 2-card hand for 9. Super strong. Comes up in other ways as well when you just draw extra cards like on your Bloodrush or Art of Wars, whatever it is. So still going to run the 2 Howls, still going to run the 2 Ghostlies, like I said. Still going to run the 1 Wild Ride, because there's no punish on this one. It's just draw discard. So, you've got small combos still in like the Eye of Ophidia to make sure it hits. But everything else in the deck here is just doing what it wants to do, right? You're going to see these cards the first way through, and they're all going to do something above average. And that's the key to Levia. All these are above average rate. Swing Big, of course, is as well. Bloodrush, huge amounts of pressure. Art of War, turns that just get unlocked to another degree, especially with the Gravelings. And then the Talisman of Recompense is really strong in these mid-range playstyles as well, because like I had mentioned when I talked about this card initially, mid-range should be a very easy matchup for Levia because your deck just is so powerful. There's so much damage in there, but the clunkiness is what's going to kill you. So when you have Talisman in these mid-range matchups, just being able to drop it, such a good safety net, so strong. You're hopefully going to be on like Hope Merchant's Hood as well. You're going to at some point summon Blasmafet, and you just build up these safety nets, and it's just really hard to lose those games. So this is what mid-range looks like. It's my favorite way to play the deck, but the basically no way to lose version would be anti-control. So let me show you that one. So I really like playing against hard control with Levia. There's not a lot of this in the game. Bravo used to play like really hard control into Levia, but now they've taken it to more mid-range where they are going to try to trade back into you more aggressively rather than just full block you out. Dash as well used to play really hard control into Levia, but I think even they know now that it's a bit riskier, so they're going to go control, or they're going to go more mid-range. But really it's old him that plays super hard control, and I would consider actually Prism and sometimes OTK Viserai, if you know they're on that, to be appropriate for this kind of sideboard. So what you're going to do with this kind of sideboard is just pull all your resources towards these cards. Make your recursion pieces so strong and overwhelming that you're not almost losing any threat in your deck when you're sinking resources into these cards. And it just almost turns you into a mill deck. You're going to pour through your opponent's resources, and they're going to be blocking out, and not understanding why your deck is still so strong. Well, that's because you're going to take out everything that doesn't help that strategy, right? So you're going to take out the pulpings and the wild ride. They're just not the kind of aggression you really need to guarantee the wins like this. You want the guaranteed wins to come from the value you pull out of these cards. So we're taking these out. We're taking out double Ghostly because you're all in on the Shadow Plasmaphet engine here. So one Ghostly is enough. It's just there for when you need it. This is not something you're really trying to find too early or anything like that. So you're taking out now 6 cards. Also, we're going to drop the Mark of the Beast because you're losing a lot of the discard synergy. And at the same time, the ability for Mark of the Beast to be played without banish is actually not useful here. You want things to banish from your graveyard because you want to be resetting these pieces. So you can drop Mark of the Beast. It doesn't feel that bad in these matchups, honestly. But you know, if you really wanted to, it could be Swing Big or Mark the Beast that you drop for this. I personally feel pretty fine dropping Mark the Beast, but I could see an argument for Swing Big as well. And then you're going to drop the double Talisman. And this is because in these slow matchups, you'd think Talisman is actually really good. I find it to kind of be a little irrelevant because when a deck is trying to full block you out, you can turn an all red hand into some kind of threat anyway. You're not under pressure to be blocking and try to play something as well that really makes an all red hand so terrible. So I just don't find Talisman like really worth it for those matchups. So that leaves us with the rest of the deck here, and this is really where like the Shadow Puppetries come up big because it just adds a whole nother way to pull value out of your attackers from the Banished Zone like Ghostly Visit and Deep Rooted Evil. You lead with Shadow Puppetry, pulling out or starting with one of these attacks and then following it up here, and it's just another way to dump your resources into renewable damage. The other thing is that in these control matchups, you can actually roll Scab Skins quite a bit more. But when you roll Scab Skins more, of course, there's more opportunity for you to roll a 1 or something and really get punished for the blood that you would take if you roll a 1. So, of course, after that first Gambler's re-rolls a 1, you want to be very careful after the fact, but that still means you probably need Scab Skins pushes to help close here and there. You just need to now make sure you do it after some Go Again has already turned off Blood Debt, like a Shadow Puppetry on one of these, or an Art of War, or leading with like Unworldly Convulsions. Once those have turned off Blood Debt, you're pretty safe to then start rolling Scab Skins again as part of your turn-by-turn playstyle, because Law of Averages says you will hit some of the time, and the times you do hit are really huge for the ability of a defensive deck to fully block you out that turn. They can't block out 18 damage. Like they just can't. It's not in the cards. So stacking up those extra action points after a Go Again is really strong. And even the turns where you don't hit, you just roll like a 2-3 and get the 1 action point back. You know, it's still going to take their full hand, if not more than that. Their arsenal as well to try to fully block out your turn when you're stacking even more buffs with like Howl from Beyonds and stuff. So I really consider control to be very easy for Levia. I think at first you may not be playing it correctly if you're losing to some of these games, but it's all about just sinking resources here and making sure that when you go for your Blood Rush plays or your Art of Wars, that you are maximizing the damage on those turns. Because I see a lot of people go for suboptimal Blood Rushes, and this is actually something that affects every single playstyle of Levia. But when you're playing these longer control games, every time you go for a suboptimal Blood Rush, like just play Blood Rush off 3 cards and don't even have an arsenal set up, that's just horrible. You're losing so much value on these kinds of cards. Or like playing an Art of War before you have a Graveling Growl set up in arsenal, you can just pitch that Art of War into the deck and just let it come back later. Because later in the game, it's still going to be a Go Again that lets you play something like Deep Rooted Evil. So forcing an Art of War when you banish something strong like an Endless Maw, like it's probably just not worth it in those kind of games. So anyway, that's kind of the overview of this kind of deck. If anyone's brave enough to take it to a ProQuest, all power to you. This, like I said, I built this deck to kind of just sit down from your opponent and at least give yourself a coin flip's chance to win the game, because you can just have insane draws with this deck. But, you know, if it was a mid-range meta, if it was a control meta, God, this deck would be so good. And I hope that's what comes in our future, because I'm waiting for the day Levia is truly the correct deck to take to an event, because I'd love that. I want these Levia wins, baby. I'm really trying out here. I need something to go my way in this meta game. So anyway, hope you enjoy the deck list here. Also just uploaded the club one as well, so give that a watch. And best of luck to you all in the ProQuest season.